The influx of, say, the more affluent residents in this area, they're coming from both coasts, from wherever, largely millennials, young folks who are in the technical industries and so forth. And so they're bright, and they're looking for a spot to live where they don't have to commute very far, and so they're trying to buy cheap lots in the inner city and put up large homes on them. And the development people, the builders, are following that market. The folks are coming in here from everywhere. Austin's popular. Everybody watches Austin City Olympics. There's a lot of hype. And, the Chamber of Commerce loves that, and of course the real estate industry does too, but it is inevitable that it's going to cause pressures on the inner city. And basically that's forcing out some of the traditional landowners and the homeowners in this area. This particular area was characterized by a lot of black households and a lot of rental property. And as the value of the properties have gone up, the tax appraisals, of course, are higher, and some families have simply been taxed out. They generally move to the northeast, some to the southeast, but to Pflugerville, Lockhart, the whole area around Pflugerville, a lot of black people who have moved there into cheaper homes that they can afford to pay the taxes on. But by and large, this area has become more affluent, and so the way it works is somebody builds or buys a property here, and some of the lots go for almost $250,000 to $300,000. That will double the taxes on a nearby home. So a family that might have been paying $1,500 a year suddenly is paying $5,000 to $6,000 a year on their home, and some simply can't afford it. They're on fixed income. And while they're there on fixed income, the appraisal system in Texas really negatively impacts low-income households. It's discriminatory. And in Texas, it's economic, but in Texas, most of the poor people are black or brown. So you could interpret it to be a racist tax process in Texas. It's archaic. It'll never get changed. The real estate industry loves it. They're making money head over heels, both by the development, by pushing people out, taking their properties and redeveloping it for upscale people. The market is simply against retaining a middle and low income community inside the central part of Austin. It's unfortunate that at the legislative level we have so many conservatives. Other states have done things like inclusionary zoning. You go to Massachusetts, New York, Colorado, California, etc. Almost all states, with the exception of two, one being Texas, has adopted inclusionary zoning for cities. And what that is based on a study. A city can require developers of new units to provide a percentage of those units for low-income people and middle-income people. And it depends on the study. It's complex because they take in market forces, they take in the needs of the city to retain their workforce inside the city. And it's called a nexus study because it looks at a nexus of variables. It takes professionals to do it, but they're done very commonly now all over the United States. Texas is still back somewhere in the last century, and it has not adopted that, so cities like Austin can't implement it. And we were hopeful that this neighborhood would be able to do it because we were in a homestead preservation district that had been established. And it was allowed in that district. But the city of Austin, the council, sat on its hands for 10 years and did not implement it. And in the last legislative session, the lawmakers took away the potential for even doing the inclusionary zoning in a homestead preservation district. So that opportunity is gone. What you're left with are what you might call incentive programs, where you do a trade-off where builders are allowed to build bigger and taller and whatever buildings they want to build in exchange for affordable units. And so far, Austin has not come up with a formula for those incentives that has really moved many units. It just doesn't happen. They do it sometimes in new subdivisions that are on the periphery of town, and they allow more density in those subdivisions, more units, if you will, if they'll put in a certain percentage of affordable units. Some builders do that, some don't. and it's not spoken to, and the builders will not describe it, but frequently they simply don't want to mix poor people in with middle and upper middle income housing because of the snob situation. There are people who simply won't buy near poor people. That kind of discrimination is alive and ugly in Texas. It's all over the United States, though, and it's right here in Austin. But builders and the real estate community will never speak to the snob element. They simply speak to a market force. And market forces are racist in the bottom line in Texas and America, too. How does gentrification help people who are making the policies?
Yeah.
Well, if you're a council member and you like to have a lot of money in your political coffer, you might want to cater to the developers and the banks who finance them so that you get a lot of contributions to your particular area. And there are PACs that are set up with dominated by realtors. And if you're a council member who's voting repeatedly to give them breaks on the particular density or whatever they're wanting as they build, you're probably going to get a lot more money into your political coffers. So there are incentives, and it's rampant in Texas. It's most vulgar in the legislature. And there's a site called Follow the Money where you can see which candidates are getting money from whatever group. But you have the entities like Bank of America and Wells Fargo and so forth that put their money into PACs, that put the money into the candidates who are supporting the upscale developments. So it's all triggered. Low-income people do not traditionally have a lot of money to donate to political campaigns, so we don't. And it's very difficult for a grassroots candidate to run against one of these candidates that are being supported by PACs. That's the way it is all over Texas. In fact, it's pretty much the way through the United States. Austin is no different than any other place. Money talks. And that is the unwritten and unspoken motto of the state of Texas. Money talks. It elects officials, it sets policy, it comes in and has coffee with you, it tells you what to do. It would if you could limit the amount of money put forth by PACs, which is not done in Texas. So yeah, that would have an impact on local races as well, but particularly on statewide races. But on the legislative areas, the senators and the local representatives, they get a lot of money from PACs. And if those amounts and contributions were limited, where those folks would have to count themselves to a lot of local voters as opposed to just the PACs, it could have an influence over time to give more power to grassroots folks, but that's not the way the system's loaded at this point. As far as somehow having an effect where you would subdue some of the gentrification and retain some of the affordable housing in the area and what it would do and have a positive effect for the city. One thing, it would keep some of the workforce in the city. The cities and many other cities are congested with people driving back and forth. The public transportation in Austin sucks. I'm quoting a lot of my neighbors who are forced to use it. And whenever you have a lot of traffic and congestion, you have a problem with health and the environment. But when we force the workforce to Lockhart, Pflugerville, and wherever, and they have to commute back in, the average person out there, household, is going to spend $3,000 a year commuting back and forth just in their auto fuel and so forth. Then they're going to spend 45 minutes to an hour each way each day. So you get a quality of life issue and an impact on their families and so forth. And they just have to eat that when they move out of town to housing they can afford. What happens in the inner city is it literally gets choked with those folks commuting back into work. And you cannot build enough roads, although Texas is road-centric. It only thinks in terms of roads, not rail, not bus lines, not anything. Public transportation is something for poor people and is generally looked down on and not funded in any city to speak of significantly. There are better systems in Dallas with DART. Houston has a pretty good system. Austin still is barely going in rail. It should have built rail, commuter rail, 30 years ago. particularly on I-35, but you have to fight a whole other culture there because the Texas Department of Highways and the Texas Department of Transportation is highway centric. If it's not on a rubber tire, it doesn't work. They're not interested in it. They have an unwritten motto: if it moves, tax it; if it doesn't, pave it. And so rail and modes of higher density communication is simply not in their model. They can't do it. They don't want to do it. And it comes back to politics. All the money is in building roads. There are huge organizations and PACs of road builders, and they contribute to these same politicians, just as real estate people do. The same pocket in the aisle, and so the city of Austin, which is very much like the rest of Texas, its transportation system is really biased against low-income people who may have to ride the bus, who may try to commute back in. And the same realtor system is pushing them out of town. So you've got a capitalist system, of which Austin is just a classic example, and I don't know of any city who's really had much effect on it, including Portland and Seattle. They have created more dense developments, but at the same time, the rents are extremely high there, and people of low income in Portland and Seattle are having to commute further and further from further distances, and so the impacts are similar. Austin is just entering into that. It's going to get in the cusp of it. The current plan, a thing called Code Next and Imagine Austin, kind of looks at that, but it really doesn't address it, because ultimately that plan is highly influenced by the same developers and road mongers that we've had, and that hadn't changed. The politics haven't changed. So urban planning is a nice idea. We don't have it. But it would be nice to have some people who work with their hands and their hearts get into politics. But again, if they're going to do that, they're going to have funding and backers and some kind of political moxie and understanding. And most low-income people were not raised around that. And again, they may get a few neighbors to contribute, and maybe they'll get a few $1,000s. But if they're going to go along against the landed politicians and all the PACs, they're going to be competing with $20,000 and $30,000. And those folks will just plaster the world with signs and with their own propaganda. And a candidate from the grassroots rarely can get there. Well, limiting the campaign contributions is one way, but there are other ways. The city can host more candidate forums where they bring in these people and let them all speak. They have a few of those, but generally they're invitation only. League of Women Voters is probably one of the models. It's a volunteer group, of course, but they pull in candidates, grassroots, and the upscales too. And they talk about issues. And sometimes the grassroots candidates can get their issues out. We have a few council members now who do identify and have tried to promote affordable housing to some extent. Again, they have to be careful about not abusing some of the PACs and the real estate and banking powers that be. But they were elected some with some grassroots support, so there's some instances where that is occurring. They're not popular with the real estate industry, and they're walking on eggs because they know if they cross them a lot, they will have candidates that come out against them that are going to be highly funded, and they'll be challenged, and that will happen repeatedly. So they try, in many cases, to kind of walk a line between the developers and the communities they serve, and that's the hard road to go, and they get some hard votes. So you see a trend in there, but over a period of time, many council members don't walk that line very well, and they slowly, in Texas, become more and more attuned to the developers and the money side. It wears you out having to work with your constituents at a grassroots level. And many of us constituents, we all have our pet projects and our own pet peeves, and this we want and that we want. So we can pester a candidate to death and inundate them with a million causes, and we can quite literally wear them out. It's not easy to be a grassroots elected politician at any level in Texas. It doesn't happen very often. I work for a nonprofit that features a lot of housing, but we're community development. And the nonprofit does not engage in any kind of politics where we would be backing an individual. You can't do that and be a nonprofit. Okay. You can be involved in causes, and we've been advocates for affordable housing now for 37 years. And that probably won't change. But when we deal with a candidate, I personally could endorse a candidate, but the organization that I chair as a nonprofit can't do that. It's not allowed. When a nonprofit engages into that, it loses its IRS status as a nonprofit. You become a political advocacy or an advocate for politicians and so forth when you do that. So you cannot endorse candidates, you can endorse causes, and we have to walk that line very carefully.
And so what's the history of the organization?
The history of the Blackland Community Development Corporation, we're 34 years old. We started as a subsidiary of the Blackland Neighborhood Association. You have to go back to it. In 1980, the University of Texas wanted to annex this area, and they wanted to annex half the neighborhood over to Chacon. They didn't explain why, but they wanted to take it, and they annexed north of Manor Road, where now the present maintenance facility is located, and demonstrated that they could use eminent domain. In the area to the south, they began to buy voluntarily from owners. Many of the owners panicked and knew that eminent domain was coming, and so they sold if they could. Then you had speculators that owned property in the area and were generally renting it. And it was given, and this was in 1980, it was a sixth annexation by the UT. And so it was just given that they were going to continue to go east, and that goes back to the 1928 City Master Plan that segregated Austin. And it moved people from West Austin to East Austin. And in East Austin, that area was west of what was then East Avenue, which is now I-35, and then south of Manor Road down to the river. Brown people, the Hispanic population, generally settled from 11th Street south, where the black populations settled from 11th Street northward to include the Blackland neighborhood. This area, and that same plan in 1928 called for the university to grow eastward. So that put a lot of black people in this area, and the university slowly moving in and pushing them out. And that was planned in 1928. And that continued in 1980, and when they began the sixth annexation, the neighborhood formed the Blackland Neighborhood Association, and we began to meet, and for 3 years we fought them in the press, and we were fairly successful, but they continued to buy land in the area. And as they bought land, it was sort of like a cog that clicked forward, but it didn't go back. And we were losing one house after another. Most of those households were renters, poor people who couldn't fight it. The neighborhood association, when it formed, included tenants and its participants. You didn't have to be a homeowner or any of that. You could take both. And it was fairly active. Of course, given the stress of the annexation, a lot of people participated. But for 3 years, it had some impact, and the press was very good in giving the neighborhood side of it. And since the university had no particular purpose for the land, but they were evicting low-income people, who visually, on the 6 o'clock news, you saw these people sitting out on their curbs with their belongings, waiting to move when they were evicted by their landlord. It didn't look good for the university, but we were losing because they kept buying. So we started a nonprofit in 1983. The Blackland Community Development Corporation is kind of a economic development wing of the Blackland Neighborhood Association. Now they overlapped in leadership, some of the same people. In fact, at times we met same night, we just changed hats, and the president of the association would hand off to the president of the nonprofit, same people in the room. And we had 2 other organizations, advisory board for the Blackland Neighborhood Center and the advisory board for Alamo Park, were also made up of mostly the same people. So we sometimes had 4 meetings with the same people one night, if the agenda wasn't packed. Otherwise, we had to sort it out and meet several times. But you only have so much leadership in a a 24 block area, you don't have that many folks, maybe 500 people, of which there may be 20 or 30 that have the leisure time and the ability to meet. So you don't have a lot of soldiers in these fights. So we wore out the ones we had and economized our meetings as best we could, but the nonprofit got into the housing business when the University of Texas started to annex the area. They didn't coordinate very well with the city council at that time. And there were some resentful people who didn't want them to move into this area on the council. And so we were successful, the nonprofit, in getting $500,000 in community block development grant funds in 1985. We took that $500,000 and we built 9 units of housing. We purchased land here and there and leased one tract of land from the city. And I misspoke, we put in 11 units of housing. And some of that was directly in the area that the University of Texas wanted to annex. So suddenly we were competing with them, and we had decided strategically and politically that if we were going to have any impact on their annexation problems, we were going to have to get in the real estate business. And so we did with a nonprofit. And myself and 4 other neighbors started it, and 3 of those neighbors have passed on now. Over the years, we've had 10 CEOs, you might say, that have helped us manage our housing and so forth. Sometimes they were just property managers early on when we didn't have many houses. But we have been able to get into other things, supportive services and so forth. We brought in transitional families, homeless families, for 20 years, and we had a caseworker that worked with them. And that program ended a couple of years ago. We were very small. City County Health Department didn't like to manage grants that were less than $50,000, and we only pulled down $30,000 a year. And so they took the caseworker away, but we still work with homeless families and bring them in as best we can support them. The as best we can support them comes from some of our units. We are fortunate we have Section 8 tenants who pay full market rate. And in those instances, we actually make a little money from those houses. And with that, we can subsidize very low income people coming in who can pay almost no rent. So we take from Peter and pay Paul, so to speak, and our board budget is very critical, and we spend a lot of time in our monthly meetings looking at our budget and making sure we're in the black. And sometimes we're not. But we're not about making money, we're about helping families and households. And that has gone on. Back to the transitional families, we helped about 200 families in that 20 years. We had 9 houses we'd set aside for them with casework services. And most of those families, about 60% of them, did get on their feet. Some of them continued to have problems after they left, particularly those that had substance abuse issues. And we would take people in with nonviolent criminal records. We'd bring them in if they were on a program for dealing with substance abuse and so forth. We brought in a lot of struggling families. We helped a lot of them. And those households, to get into our housing, of course, they had to have kids. We were looking for families. And so our typical household was a woman with a couple of kids struggling to make ends meet. And I feel very good about what we did with those families over the years. We're still doing that as we can, but we have a little grant, and we have a caseworker who works with people, but it's not under a formal program of the City County Health Department. It's just one we do. And I think I'm told by some of our colleagues in the affordable housing area that we're one of the only neighborhoods in America that bring in homeless families. We still do it. We're proud of them. They serve on our board sometimes. We always have a few of our renting residents, I prefer to call them that, than tenants, on our board. They're very helpful. They can share the thing if they want to. And we have a thing with our housing. We know that most people in America anymore that come from low-income areas are never going to buy or be able to afford a home. Home ownership for low-income people is a myth. It's gone. And so in our rental housing, we tell them, and it's true, as long as they can pay their rent and they keep their nose clean, no problems with the law, they might as well own the house where they're in. We don't evict. Now, what's interesting is a lot of our tenants are in their homes for more than 10 years. And some of the household composition changes, the numbers. For instance, the kids grow up, graduate from school. A household that might have been a parent and several kids someday is just a parent. Well, he or she, the parent, we're not going to kick them out of the neighborhood, but what we have to do, and we try to do if they want to, is right size them. Put them in a unit that maybe doesn't have 2 or 3 bedrooms, but has enough for them, and one that they would like to move to when it comes available. And then we can put another family that does need 2 or 3 bedrooms in there. And they're eligible to do that after they've lived here 5 years. And if they've lived here 10 years and everything's going well, if they're still the same size, not a change in bedrooms, if there's a house down the street they've always wanted to live in, it comes vacant, we let them move. They have to pay the move-in costs and all the change up in both places. But our point is to keep our residents in the area, and we're not about making money, we're about keeping stable families, helping them, their kids. We're really about the kids, ultimately. So we've got little pocket parks, we've got all kinds of things for kids and activities for kids. We've got a lot of gardens we've built. We grow gardeners. A lot of our tenants have never had the time or never learned how to grow a garden, so it's magic when seeds bloom. And for kids, they pick it up faster frequently than their parents. So sometimes the kids can teach the parents. So we try to be a community in that sense. We try to be as green as we can afford to be. We have 6 houses now that have solar roofs, and we can't afford to do that. But we do have companies that will donate that solar to us and put it on, and we're delighted to have it because it really reduces their bills significantly. So, and we find that every time one of these families with kids saves some money, well, it goes right into the kids. It's an investment in the future, and it's really good to see that happen. So, we have spread our houses all over the neighborhood. We have 49 units we rent now on 32 properties. Some of those properties have duplexes on them. We have an 8-plex apartment. There's various sizes of units, but a lot of them are duplex. And we're presently putting some alley flats on the back of some large lots and doing infill. And here at the Stewart Conservatory, we're zoned to put in 8 units of multifamily here in time. Presently, every night, about 130 people are sleeping under our roofs, scattered all over this little 24 block area. And we would hope with the infill and the multifamily in a few years we might get that up to, instead of 49 units, maybe up to 65, 66 units. And we'll have closer to maybe 170 to 180 residents in here. We presently have about 25% of the population and 20% of the houses in the area. And those are locked in affordability for 99 years. We're not going anywhere. So any of the new affluent folks who are going to move in here, they're going to notice a lot of these houses that have domino addresses on them. Those are nonprofit houses. They blend in except with a domino address. And those are not going anywhere. So if they're going to live in the area, they're going to be around low-income people. And you know, some of the folks, and I don't want to put the gentrifiers in the bad box, some of those folks are really nice and want to live in diverse neighborhoods. And at any given time, we will have 1 or 2 of them on the board. And they're productive, sometimes been architects, sometimes just administrative people, but their skills are brought in and they can support and have supported affordable housing. The ones that don't are living behind the fences that I had mentioned earlier. But we have some good folks over here who, luck or pluck, have ended up being fairly affluent. They help out. And so that works very well. So we can't, it gets sticky when you get into individuals and so forth, but we have some good people of all levels of income in here. The Community Development Block Grant we got, CDBG, we love acronyms in the housing area. That was a common thing, it still is, although the current Trump administration is trying to get rid of that. And that is based on a population in any city or county, any political subdivision in America gets us some of the federal money under that program to allocate out to communities. In rural areas, you'll find that darn near all of the fire departments, The fire engines and the firehouses were financed by CDBG money. And in urban areas, we don't think about that because we have municipal taxes to take care of it. But throughout America, there are all kinds of programs in both urban and rural areas that are financed by CDBG. So back when we got ours, our little grant in 1985, $500,000 was quite a lot of money. Since then, inflation has made it nominal. But we got that because of lobbying with the city, and there was a city council member who really championed our cause. Her name was Sally Shipman. She passed away about 15 years ago. But Mrs. Shipman really empathized with what we were trying to do over here and carried our flag and helped us all the way through. And she was probably the most instrumental council member at that time in seeing that we got that money. And once we got it, we used it, and again, we got started in the housing area. We fought the university back to that for 12 years, and they finally threw in the towel. And during that 12 years of fighting in the press and putting in our housing and managing it, we got a lot of support throughout the city. I would guess 2,500 people actively supported us at one time or another. We had a lot of empathy. And the University of Texas, they were not enjoying what they were seeing when they read the papers in the morning. They were losing the press battle. And Ann Richards in 1988 was treasurer of the state of Texas, and she ran for governor and won. And during her campaign, she wrote us a letter and asked us if there was anything she could do to help us out. And of course, we wrote her back and said, yes, we've been under extreme pressure by annexation by the University of Texas since 1980, and we would appreciate some relief. Well, when she was elected, she appointed a regent, Jack Blanton, and Blanton went to the president at UT, Jim Cunningham, and told him to come to peace with our neighborhood. And so we struck a treaty with them, and a treaty would stop their annexation at Leona Street. And our nonprofit had a property on that side of Leona Street on the west side, and they had a bunch of property on the east side. In that deal that we cut with them, they traded 12 houses on lots and 8 vacant lots to us for our 1 house and 1 vacant lot. It's a pretty good trade. And we took those houses on this side of Leona and remodeled them and rehabbed them, the 12 houses, and added it to our inventory of 11, and suddenly we had 23 houses. And then when the 8 lots of vacant spots, we continued to infill on that, and eventually we got up to our 49 units. We also bought an apartment during that period from the city that under a what's called, well, it was a federal funding thing, it's a home funds. And we were able to get a lot of rehab money and so forth from the city. And so we had developed a number of houses through that time and got up to this point. But the University of Texas, when they basically divested their properties on this side, that boosted our inventory about half. And so we were on our way. Since then, we've acquired a house or two a year, and it's been very slow. So here we are after almost 35 years, and we've accumulated 49 units. And this particular community center we remodeled 3 years ago. That's pitiful. We should have done twice that much, but we couldn't get enough funding from the city. We have to match the city loans frequently, and they're forgivable loans, with loans from banks. And if we have to carry a loan, then we have to charge a lot of rent, and it makes the houses, we can make them affordable to low-income people, but it's a struggle. And again, that's part of what our board has to watch as part of its auspice each month. Are we servicing those loans? Is the rent coming in to the rate we can do that? Plus, we have to pay maintenance on that. We have to pay insurance. Housing isn't free, and because you own a house doesn't mean that you don't have any expenses. And many of our houses are older houses. They require some maintenance and upkeep. So we have a maintenance person and a property manager. Austin only has 6 neighborhood-based nonprofits to deal with housing. And that's pitiful. Houston and Dallas and practically any city this size or larger will have dozens. The city of Austin has never done anything to foster these kind of neighborhood-based nonprofits. We're a risk to them legally because if one of our board members didn't understand what they're trying to do and they somehow were on the take, there would be fraud issues and so forth. But on the other hand of it, there's a lot of dedicated people and that fraud does occur, but very rarely. And so the city, though, has not fostered these. They've done very little to support them. And I have to say, the people that are in the affordable housing advocacy area has not done much to create more nonprofits either. You've had neighborhoods that wanted to do it, and there are resources to start a nonprofit, and there are resources to train boards, but boards are complicated, and they have to be careful about conflict of interest. You can't put your relatives in the house. I have 2 daughters, and they struggle, and they have children, but I can't let them live in any of our nonprofit housing. It's conflict of interest. Okay, you have to be aware of those things, and you're not born knowing those things. I mean, you have to be trained. And over the years, all nonprofits run into these kind of conflicts of interest, so you have to be constantly on top of it. So there are risks, and you have to train your boards, and board members may be good people, but they have to be trained over time. And our board members typically will be on board 5 or 6 years. It takes a couple of years to figure out what's going on. It's like walking into a meeting in a complex organization and you're disoriented for some time. And I take on a role as chair of our board to try to train people, and I've helped start nonprofits in other cities, Fort Worth, Lubbock, Tulsa, various places, and gone in and try to find, the key thing you need though, the neighborhood has got to want the housing. And a community development organization is like a 3-legged stool. Biggest leg on that stool is the community, the neighbors themselves. And they have to want to retain and build new affordable housing. And in a lot of neighborhoods that don't want that because they're dominated by affluent people who want their property value to go up. Okay, if you're one of those folks who are interested in speculation basically, and your home value is going up, you don't want rental property in here. And so one of the first things we ran up against when we were fighting UT with our nonprofit back in the 80s is we had a group of black affluent homeowners from the east side that got all bothered because we were going to build rental property in here. And they came to one of our meetings and put on a show and said they did not want any of those renters. They wanted the University of Texas to annex their property so they could move out of this God-forbidden neighborhood. And they basically threw a fit. We assuaged them by telling them we wouldn't build a house beside any homeowner that didn't want it beside them. And amazingly, that shut them up. So we went ahead and we did exactly that through the years. And with them out, to one side, we were able to go ahead and continue. But that demonstrates that what can happen in any neighborhood, because a community is diverse by definition. Not everybody's going to agree, thank God. And that dialogue and friction can be very good. But how many communities do you know offhand that would really welcome affordable housing for low-income people? I don't think you'll find many. And so that reluctance to engage with that kind of community, if you will, and diversify your community is why you don't have a lot of nonprofits in America's cities, as you've got speculators there. If you were to look at that dynamic from a sociology standpoint, if you had a scale here, and the interest on this scale was people's interest in money, speculating, I want to make money. And over here is their commitment to community. They want to know their neighbors. They want to have a safe neighborhood. They're very committed to getting out and doing it. Well, you've got those two lines. Most people fall somewhere in the middle. Yeah, they want to watch their home values, or they want the rent to be reasonable, and they want a community. and most people fall in love. But you have speculators who flip their houses frequently, particularly now with some of our upscale people coming in, and their house is not in a community. I said earlier, they could be on a ship at sea. They're not here. They're speculating. And they're over here on the scale of the dollars. And over here on the community, what's that? And increasingly, in my opinion, social anthropologists, people don't know what a community is. They're not interested in going next door and borrowing a cup of sugar. They're not interested in crime next door. They're not interested in anything up and down the streets. Many people are not, because they were raised in areas that weren't communities. Okay. If you have experienced community where you know your neighbors, you like to get out on the porch, you like to play dominoes, you like the kids to play in your yard, if you like those things, then you miss them. But if you never experienced them, you don't miss that. So it comes back to, does a neighborhood want to be a community? Are there people there who don't even understand what a community is? Or are they just speculators? So how do you start a nonprofit? Well, it starts itself. The neighbors either want a community with the diverse people in it, or they don't. And our little motto in Blackland, we borrowed it from Martin Luther King, his dream. We say the dream starts here. Well, that dream is, of course, about a diverse community of various people getting along in peace and harmony. Pretty simple. But in America, unless you really work toward that and you have some diverse people, i.e. low-income people, you don't have anything there. You can't achieve that dream. The upscale people will never have it. And so that's really what motivated us. We put that motto in our newsletter early on. We keep it there, and we explain it just like I just did. And some people get it, and some don't. Back to how do you start nonprofits and why aren't there more? How do you start a community? A group of people really have to have a feeling for where they are. You got to define a community. And that comes back to, do they identify with a particular location they're in? Do they identify with their neighbors and the cultural amenities, be it a park, be it a street, be it a playground, be it a neighborhood center? Do they identify with that at all? If they don't, and nobody else does, you don't have a community. You just got a bunch of people living in close proximity. In my observation, we have a lot of people in America in urban areas living in close proximity and not in communities. Well, the advantages of having a community where people know each other is you don't have much crime. If you were living next to me and you were broken into, or your car was broken into, or something happened to you and I knew it, I would be alarmed. On the other hand, if I saw someone breaking into your car or your house, I would call the police, even though it's not my house or my car. And you might do that for neighbors who know each other, and you do that in a community. But in a more austere setting where everybody kind of leaves each other alone and kind of afraid of their neighbors, it's none of their business. And so you have soaring crime rates. A lot of it is because nobody understands what, or cares or empathizes with their neighbors. And a crime to you in my neighborhood is a crime against me. And we have folks who are sitting on their porches, particularly elderly, every day watching the streets, eyes on the streets. The police will tell you that that's better than them. That's the best surveillance you get, are neighbors watching out. And in our architecture, in our nonprofit, we put big porches on our houses to invite people to come out and look at their neighbors and interact with their neighborhood. So we believe in porches, not police. And police agree with that. There's nothing against police. But you don't have enough police to patrol everything in an urban area. And so eyes on the street, neighbors who care about each other's health and safety, that keeps it down. Blackland has one of the lowest crime rates in the city. We don't like to advertise that because we figure the people who want to move here will move here because it's a safe place, not because they're going to make it any safer. Again, they may put in these houses with big fences around them, and that invites crime. But one thing, they got more to steal. And then nobody can watch their place. You can't see their front door to know if anyone's breaking in, or their back door. And so the fortresses are mentioned invite crime. They foster it. And they create holes in the fabric, the social fabric of a community. And so you don't have the safety with austere neighbors that you have with neighbors that you know and can talk to and so forth. I can't walk up and down the street and exercise my dog hardly in the evenings without stopping about every other house, one of my neighbors asking me about this, that, or the other. And we talk about everything under the sun, and we share information. I learn a lot from my neighbors, and I like that. I like a feeling of a community. A lot of people like that, and if they don't have it, they miss it. We trade recipes, we celebrate babies, we celebrate weddings, and we mourn at funerals. You know, it's part of being in a real community. If you don't like doing that, you're one of the austere people that I described. And there are many people who raised that simply don't do that, never have. I can't blame them, it's just the way their culture was. And when they bring it into a community, they don't contribute to a community culture. They don't know how.